look at chapter 2 of the book of Joshua as we jump into this study on the book of Joshua. And today's story is about somebody that's pretty familiar, the central figure in today's story. Pretty familiar to probably most of you. And how about we do a little test? I'm going to say her name and then the and blank, and you fill in the blank. You ready? So the name and then the, and then you guys fill in the blank. Rahab the prostitute. Wouldn't you love that title? Wouldn't you love to be known by your sin? Ooh, got quiet in here. Like, blank the liar, blank the adulterer, blank the blank. Rahab the what? Prostitute. So we're going to talk about Rahab the prostitute. There's not a lot of days that a preacher gets to talk about prostitutes, and especially when the prostitute's going to be the hero of the story. How about that? But we're going to jump into Joshua chapter 2 and invite you to grab a Bible if you haven't already and take out your teaching notes if you haven't done so. If you didn't bring a Bible, I'd love for you to grab one from there in front of you. You can turn to page 152. Love for you to be able to follow along. Not all of chapter 2 will be on the screen. I'll have a decent part of chapter 2 on the screen. But there will be some things that I'm going to kind of skip over. I'll fill in a little bit of that. But I would love for you to be able to actually read the rest of it. Some great stuff in there. Just some of it that we're not necessarily going to look to really cover as far as how it will relate to today's teaching. And today's teaching really isn't so much about Rahab and the game changer that she's able to tell us in that, this is her thing, but something that she discovered, something that changed Rahab. Okay? And this truth, like any of the other truths that we've looked at, has the opportunity to change us, or we can choose to continue to go on the same path. But either way, there are some things that are important to know with this game changer. But here it is. God is God in heaven above and on earth below. God is God. Some of you, we just stop right there and just kind of pause and reflect and say, okay, God is God. Because sometimes what we have a tendency to do is we want to sit on the throne, and even though we wouldn't necessarily call ourselves God, we want to call the shots as God, right? Is that a true statement? Or is it just my life at times? God is God. And what's this second line, the middle line? What's it say? In heaven above and on earth below. Everybody say, aha. The aha. What does this mean? God is God in heaven above and on earth below. Let's just kind of make sure that we're all working from the same understanding, knowing that God is God in heaven above and on earth below. What does that tell us about God? He's God. All right. God is God. First line. We've got that established. What else does this tell us about God? He's everywhere. Okay. We have a nice churchy word for that. Anybody know what that is? Omnipresent. Okay. He's everywhere. What else does this tell us about God?
In control.
What's that? He's in control. He's in charge. He's over all. The heavenly realms have to answer to him. And so does everything that takes place, everyone on earth. We have a nice churchy word for that too. Kind of like omnipresent, but it's a little bit different. Anybody know what that one is? Omnipotent. All powerful. He's sovereign is another nice churchy word that we have. He's over all. Okay? He's almighty. He's it. He's number one. And number two is nowhere near. Okay? God is God in heaven above and on earth below. So let's jump into Joshua chapter 2, beginning with verse 1. Then Joshua, son of Nun, we talked about Joshua a little bit last week. In case you weren't here last week, Joshua is now leading the Israelites. Moses had been leading the Israelites, led them out of Egypt. They crossed the Red Sea. Pharaoh's army got swallowed up in the Red Sea. And then they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Moses dies. God says, okay, Joshua, now you're in charge. So Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Now this time it's important to see that there's a distinction between the 2 spies going into Canaan now versus several years before when spies were sent in. And Joshua was actually one of those spies that was sent in to spy out the land, to go on a recon mission and find out what's in the land, what is it like, and what's our opposition. Anybody remember how many spies went in the first time? 12 spies, 1 spy representing each of the tribes of Israel. Okay, so they go in, 12 spies went in, 12 spies come back out. They give the report to Moses. 2 gave a positive report. Said, you know what, the land's flowing with milk and honey. I mean, we brought back some grapes, the grapes like the size of basketballs. I mean, these things are huge. This is awesome. And you know what? Formidable opponents, but God is with us. We can do it. And then there were 10 that said, yep, you're right. As far as the land is great and the food looks awesome, but we can't do this. We look like grasshoppers compared to them. This is not a good idea. So this time Joshua sends 2 spies, and I think it's significant because the first time 2 spies came back that said positive, 10 were against it. You know what? Sometimes it's better to not have a committee. Sometimes you just need a couple people that are go-getters and let's get this thing done. But he says, sends 2, go look over the land. He said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. Now, as we talk about prostitute, Rahab the prostitute, and there are some people, and even if you're following along, if you look at some of them by prostitute will have a little letter or something. It may be like a C or an H or something like that, a little footnote, and you go down and or innkeeper. Any of you have that? Any of you find that? Like, oh, innkeeper. And wouldn't that be nice? Rahab the innkeeper. Doesn't that sound a lot more professional? And I can put that on my door, Not Rahab the prostitute. That's not something you want to put on your door. That's not going to have something, have that framed and put on your wall. The innkeeper. Well, the word that's used in the Old Testament, it could be used either way, prostitute or innkeeper. Although mostly if you go back and you look at the time, that it was usually a package deal. The innkeepers, they provided a place to stay and they also provided other things. If you look at the New Testament, because Rahab gets ink in the New Testament, 3 different spots in particular. She's mentioned in Matthew chapter 1 in the lineage of Christ. We'll come back to that in a moment. When she's mentioned in Matthew chapter 1, it's just Rahab. It tells who she married and who she gave birth to. When she's mentioned in the book of Hebrews and in the book of James, and she's commended for her faith, she is actually called Rahab the prostitute, or some translations, harlot. They did not clean it up, and the word that's used there in that case does not equal or cannot be understood as innkeeper. It is what it is. She was what she was. She was a prostitute. And so you go at first, okay, like, we're going to just work through this. Is that all right? We talked through some things today. So God's people, God's men went into a prostitute's house. Is that okay, Pastor Len? Well, I just want to be clear. Do not go into a prostitute's house, okay? Understand this. They were spies, and they were going in, and they needed basically a cover. They needed to go to a place where there wasn't going to be a lot of talk going on. People weren't going to be spreading news about who they saw at a certain place, right? I mean, typically speaking, this isn't something that other people share. And so you could go in, it's on the edge of town, it's on right there, and you could kind of sneak in, and nobody's talking, they're not asking a lot of questions because they don't want you asking questions about them either. Let's just keep everything on the down low. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens at the prostitute's house stays at the prostitute's house. And so we can go in, we can get some information, and then kind of scope out the land, and then we can move on. Okay? She ends up hiding them. Okay? Probably counterintelligence, if you think about it. Looking to protect Jericho, go, you know what, if we're a spy, where are we looking to go? But however it happens, the king finds out that there are a couple spies from the Israelites that are scoping out the place, and so king's men come to Rahab and says, hey, we heard that there are some Israelites here, where are they? And she says, basically, you know what, they did come by, yep, you're right about that, but they have left, and I have no idea where they are. Truth be told, she knew exactly where they were because she had taken them upstairs to the roof of the house and hid them under some stalks of flax. Okay? Things that were used to make linen during those times. They get them wet and then they dry them out and then go through a process and make linen out of it. And so she had taken them up there, hid them under that, and from what I understand, they'd be things that would really smell bad, and it's just a big pile of mess. And so, pretty good hiding place. People are like, I'm not going to mess with that. She knew exactly where they were. And so this begs the question, not only do we have the question of, is it okay to go to a prostitute's house, but we have the question of, is it okay to lie? Because there is nothing getting around the fact that Rahab lied in this situation, right? Would we agree with that? So the question then is it okay to lie? And if we were to take a poll, some of you might say, absolutely not. Because, as we learned a few weeks ago, a skittle is a skittle. A lie is a lie. And lies are sin. And some of you would say, well, it depends on the circumstance. Which gets a little fuzzy. We start talking about situational ethics. Because who gets to depend on when it's okay or not okay? And there was some that give Rahab a pass here because, after all, this is kind of like espionage. This is spy games. This is like life and death. And so he gave her a pass. And, well, okay, maybe we can do that. And there's some, probably teenagers that are thinking, okay, I can use that. I'm out late. Come back and parents ask me where I was, and this is kind of life or death, because if I tell them where I really was at a party and what was going on and these kind of things, like, I could die. And so life or death, I'm going to save my hide, and I'm going to lie. I was hanging out with Pastor Len. Life or death. Well, you see what I'm saying? Situational ethics, and we get into some trouble. Here's my best take on this. Okay? At this point, Rahab was not a follower of God. she's a prostitute. Lying's not the only thing that she should be concerned about at this point. She told a lie. The Bible does not commend her for her lie. The Bible doesn't condone her for her lie either. The Bible is just saying this is the story. There's a bigger part to the story than what she told the king's men. And that's what I'd really rather focus on, even more so than who she was or what she did for a profession. So let's keep going, shall we? We'll skip down to verse 8. I filled in the blanks from the first verse. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord, and she uses the covenant name for God, the name that God had told Moses what to call him by, Yahweh or Jehovah. I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. She goes on, we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Aha! God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. But I want you to pay attention to the first part of what she said. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below, which helps us to see something with this aha, that if God is not our God, if God is not your God, that should cause great fear. Because he is over the heavens and the earth. Because he is in charge. Because he is in control. Because he is all-powerful. Because he is all-present. Because he is all-knowing. If he's not your God, if you're not on his side, what does that mean? You're against him. And he's against you. And Rahab and the rest of the Canaanites, particularly those in Jericho, say this is not our God. And we now see that God is God. Not the gods that we've been worshiping, not the gods that we have set up and said this is who we're going to listen to or we're going to try to please, and this is who we're going to ask to work on our side and to fight our battles and to help us in life. No, we understand that your God, Yahweh, Jehovah, is the God. And he is God above in heaven and on earth below. And she says a number of times, and because of that, all of us are melting in fear. Isn't that a pretty good word picture? Amen. Have you ever seen somebody melt in fear and what that looks like? They kind of just frozen, can't move on. We talked about courage last week, and in many ways this could be kind of a part 2 of that, and you'll see really as we go along, it's kind of like an onion. There's a lot of layers and they kind of intertwine. That God is God in heaven above and on earth below, and if he's not your God, that should cause great fear. It certainly did for those in Jericho, because they saw God's power. They heard what God had done. How God had, on behalf of the Israelites, split the Red Sea and allowed them to walk across on dry land. I mean, this is the God. They had heard how Israel had conquered kingdoms that others thought were unconquerable. Like, you completely destroyed these two. I mean, they were the best of the best, and you guys completely mowed through them. If that's what you did to them, what will you guys do to us? They're in fear because God is not their God. But something switches. If we go back, for the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family because I have shown kindness to you. Skip down to verse 17. Now the men had said to her, this oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless when we enter the land you have tied the scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. So in the verses in between, she says, you know what, since I helped you out, will you help me out? Will you protect me? And basically, I'm going to call on the name of your God. I'm going to bring in your God into this. And basically, in a lot of ways, we see that there's this transition, this transformation that's taking place. Rahab going from your God to Rahab taking God as her God. Saying, I want your God to give me protection. I want your God to protect my family. And she names her parents. And she asks for protection for her brothers and her sisters and all of their family. And she lets the two spies down on this red or scarlet cord. There's something about this scarlet cord that intrigues me. Now, maybe this is just kind of one of those, it just happened to be scarlet. It could have been blue. It could have been yellow. It could have been any other color. But when I see scarlet cord, I can't help but think of what many theologians and Bible scholars refer to as the scarlet thread that runs through the Bible. By this, they mean that the Bible has a theme of Jesus Christ and his sacrifice for the redemption of mankind. We see that thread of redemption in Genesis. When God has animals shed, there's a shedding of blood to provide garments of protection and covering for Adam and Eve. There's continual, we see that the thread continue throughout the Bible symbolically. As we see the ram that took Isaac's place on the altar of Moriah. We see the Passover lamb that the Egyptians or the Israelites used. They slaughtered and then placed the blood on the doorposts. And then they celebrated the Passover each year after that. How the death angel passed over their houses because the blood that was on the doorpost. That was just, it was a forerunner. It was a symbolism. It was a way of God showing what he was doing, how he was providing for them. We see it continue on, the sacrificial system that was established as they were in the wilderness. And then we see it with the scarlet rope of Rahab. We also see it especially in the crucifixion of Christ. In the blood that was shed on our behalf. And so many scholars would suggest that in a lot of ways, when the spies say, put this scarlet rope, this scarlet cord that you just let us down by, it's basically like, this is your saving grace. This is the indication. It's a symbol of what God's going to provide for you. It's a symbol of grace. It's interesting if you'll follow along, and I mentioned earlier in Matthew chapter 1, the lineage of Jesus Christ, Rahab the prostitute becomes the great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, great about 30 times over, by the way, of Jesus Christ. Now, I don't know about you, but that leaves me in awe of a holy God that would include Because after all, he's sovereign, right? He's God in heaven above and on earth below. The God of the universe would include a prostitute in the lineage of the ones who would give birth to his son on earth. That's a good God. That's a gracious God. Somebody that was not just a prostitute, she was a foreigner. Others would have said, no, can't be a part of the lineage. That's ridiculous. You've got to keep the bloodlines perfectly pure. Well, I'll tell you what. There's a bunch of impurities all throughout there anyway, even if they are Israelites. Because all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. But thank the Lord, there was one that was born in Rahab's lineage that was spotless and became the perfect sacrifice for our sins. And we see a little bit of a forerunner of that with this scarlet cord that they dropped down from the window. Well, let's continue on, shall we? And go back to the story in verse 23. Then the two men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. Can you imagine that? Hey, Joshua, we went into Jericho. We crossed the Jordan River. That was a little bit of a challenge, but we made it past the river. Then we got to Jericho. We found this house, and there was a prostitute there. So we went into her house. You did what? Yeah, we went into this prostitute's house. And then they tell the whole story. And then catch this, verse 24. They said to Joshua, the Lord has, what's that word? Surely. The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands, and the people are melting in fear because of us. When God is your God, that should cause great confidence. That's my God. Do you know what my God can do? My God can do anything. What about your God? Do you remember, maybe not everybody does this, but growing up, like my dad can beat up your dad? Like, I didn't even have to get into an argument, or usually, like very rarely, most people understood my dad could beat up their dad. My dad was a fairly imposing figure. And I was pretty certain that my dad could beat up pretty much anybody else's dad, one way or another. He was going to get the job done. I felt safe. Like wherever we go, if Dad's with me, I'm good to go. Because my dad can beat up your dad. Now, if my dad's not around, I'm a little bit scared because I couldn't beat up hardly anybody. But we get in this little, my dad can beat up your dad. Well, you know what? My God is greater than any other. And that gives great confidence. We talked about courage last week. I can have courage. I can have confidence because of the Lord. Not in who I am. And it's just wonderful. Like, surely the Lord has given us, like, that's a word of confidence, right? Like, well, I think we probably should be able to do this, maybe. 51%? No, surely. Like, we know God is with us. And if God is with us, who can be against us? Because God is God. In heaven above and on earth below. He's sovereign. He's all-powerful. That's my God. And I have confidence. Scripture talks about confidence coming before Him. In Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16, let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. I have confidence because I know who God is. I know what He's like. And by His grace, He has chosen to call me His own. And I can call Him mine. But it's interesting to me that it seems like the people of God needed a reminder about the power of God. It seems like the spies needed Rahab to give them a reminder that their God is God in heaven above and on earth below. That Rahab pointed back to how God had provided for the Israelites to cross the Red Sea, how he parted the Red Sea for them, how reminded them of how God had given them victory over these two kings and their countries. And I can't help but think that when she said, "The Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below," that they didn't think of the words that Moses had shared back in Deuteronomy, what we know as Deuteronomy chapter 4, with verse 37. Let's start there. "Because he loved your ancestors and chose their descendants after them. He brought you out of Egypt by his presence and his great strength to drive out before you nations greater and stronger than you, and to bring you into their land, to give it to you for your inheritance as it is today." Doesn't this sound a lot like the conversation that Rahab had with the spies? Who brought you out of Egypt? How did God bring them out of Egypt? Through the Red Sea. "And his great strength to drive out before you nations greater and stronger than you, and to bring you..." Nations that are greater and stronger. Sihon and Og, the two kings. Sound a little familiar? Well, let's keep going, shall we? Verse 39, "Acknowledge and take to heart this day." Because if you don't take it to heart and know that your God is God in heaven above and on earth below, then you know what? Your heart will melt in fear. But you also won't do the next part. "The Lord is God in heaven above and on the earth below." Oh, hey, there it is. "There is no other. Keep his decrees and commands, which I am giving you today, so that it may go well with you and your children after you, and that you may live long in the land the Lord your God gives you for all time." Which leads us to the last thing to understand when we know that God